And my guest today is Guy Anderson. I guested on his show a couple of weeks ago, talking about the machinations of the music industry. So today we get to turn the tables, and it's only right that I get him on as my guest on Good Vibrations. So welcome along, Guy.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
No worries. So I know I'm a bit late to the party with this whole subject area, but I have been watching with great interest from the sidelines and mentally assimilating it all. So I figured it was time I finally delved into the subjects that you get into and have a free flow discussion about all of these. So on the cards today is Tartaria. That's the main overriding one, I guess, and it ties into the idea of great resets, including the idea of a current one that we may be living in, world's fairs, orphan trains, mud floods, and genetic cloning. And I'm looking forward to you tying all these disparate elements together in this conversation. Before we get into all that, though, perhaps a little bit about your background, as you've got quite an interesting one in terms of some of your family influences. So, do you want to just walk us through that very briefly?
Yeah, sure. My interest in, I suppose, occulted knowledge came from my father. He joined the Freemasons when I was a kid, and he wouldn't tell anybody what he did there. And that instantly sparked my imagination. And my mum started telling me things that they clearly didn't get up to. And one day I cracked open his briefcase, his special oversized briefcase, which had his apron in, and in it was this book, but it was coded. A lot of the words were missing, just the first letter and the last letter. And for years, I challenged him about what really went on there. And he always used to say the same thing. He used to say to me, "You can mock and your mum can laugh, but I'm telling you now, they run the world." And as soon as I was old enough, I joined. I wanted to know what he knew. And along the way, I'd started reading books that he left lying around, from Atlantis to the Sphinx, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. And then I moved on to David Icke and then Dan Brown's novels. And I never engaged at school. I didn't believe anything that they told me made sense or was relevant to life. And um, and now it's finally made sense. As I've gotten older, I've realized that the reason things didn't make sense to me is because our history appears to be a lie. And when I discovered Tartaria, that for me became an obsession. It remains, in my opinion, the biggest conspiracy of them all to remove an entire empire and civilization from history is to me far more significant and far more important than did we land on the moon? What happened at 9/11? I think this is perhaps the biggest conspiracy that exists. But with regard to the Freemasons, I joined. I thought I would learn occulted knowledge. I learnt a few things, but not what I thought I would. My youngest son joined because I wouldn't share with him what I knew, and he left within a year of me leaving. So it was a journey that I had to take, but I suppose, I was landed with more questions than I was ever going to get answers to. But my life has been one big journey down the rabbit hole, and I'm so far down now, I can no longer watch or engage with any form of mainstream news or media.
Yeah, I get you. Why wouldn't you share your knowledge with your son? Is that down to the oath of allegiance of secrecy that you took in the ranks?
Not really, because most of that information is online, and by the time he joined, which was about 7 years ago, anything he wanted to ask me, he could have found on Google and probably did. I wanted him to decide for himself whether or not that this was a journey for him. He was obsessed with the Knights Templar. I sent him down the rabbit hole while he was at primary school, and then my dad joined in. And by the time he was at secondary school, he was reading Stephen Hawking and also David Icke. But because of his passion with the Knights Templar in particular, and he was a huge fan of Freddie Silver's work. I don't know if you're aware of him. I thought the only way he's ever going to find out about the Knights Templar and join is if he becomes a Freemason. So I warned him. You know, my lodge met at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom. There are a lot of high-ranking Scotland Yard police officers there. He will see people's careers accelerate through perhaps no justifiable explanation. And he might see things that he doesn't agree with going on. But if he wants to be a Knights Templar, he has to do this first.
Yeah. So ultimately, the Masons didn't want you, or was it your decision to walk away?
I walked away. I didn't align with them anyway. I joined because my father wouldn't tell me what he knew, and I wanted to explore occulted history by doing something that I thought would give me access to information that isn't in the public domain. But actually, it was a friend of mine in the end that got me to join his lodge, and he's a retired athlete. His name's Derek Redmond, and he was the 400-meter world champion. He was married to Sharon Davis for quite some time. I joined with him, and he joined a celebrity lodge in London, which I suppose the only person that's still about now that's a member of my lodge. And I call it my lodge because although I haven't been, it's Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can't leave as such. I am a Freemason. I'm just not a practicing one. But Jim Davidson was in our lodge, Ronnie Scott, Dick Emery. So it was a celebrity lodge, I suppose, of sorts. But by the time I left, the majority of people at that lodge were serving police officers. One of them was the Met's advisor to the Prime Minister.
Right. Do they have any concerns about the likes of you walking away and divulging secrets? Or do they just assume that you're not going to do that?
I didn't get high up enough to share anything of significance because, as I was saying a second ago, um, anything that I learned, you can Google. There are books on it. I got to the third degree, which they call Master Mason, but there's 33 levels. You're not supposed to share the passwords. You're not supposed to share the secret handshake, which they call a grip. But that's about it. But again, anyone can jump on Google. There's probably YouTube channels out there showing the handshake and talking about the passwords.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the third of 33 rungs of a ladder, I didn't know anything that's going to change the world. And people leave all the time, sometimes because of ill health. Sometimes they just lose faith in it and just walk away. But I haven't heard from anybody since I've left. None of them.
Hmm. I've just finished reading Dan Brown's current novel, The Secret of Secrets. Have you read that one?
I haven't, no.
It is amazing. It's a really gripping story. It's very cinematic. I'm picking up lots of tips myself for my own truth fiction novel that I'm writing, the completion of my trilogy. And I'm just marveling at how much he's managed to get into that book. There's so many literary devices and really clever ways of storytelling. But also, there's a lot of knowledge in there and a lot of wisdom, and a lot of it checks out. It's true. I do feel that there's a lot of disinfo in there as well, and he's rubbishing certain things which, truth alternative researchers get into. And it's almost as if he's reinforcing the official narrative on certain things. But I do suspect that Dan Brown is very high level connected. He's probably a high ranking Mason himself, simply to have had access to so much knowledge to put into his books, the Robert Langdon books specifically, the Da Vinci Code, Angels and
Yeah,
Demons, and such. So, yes, I think Dan Brown knows a lot, and he strikes me as a man on a mission to kind of divulge certain things that they don't mind getting out there, or which serve some kind of agenda for them to be out there, but to keep the lid on certain other things and reinforce official narratives. How do you feel about that guy?
I think you're bang on. Absolutely bang on the money. The first book I felt wasn't written particularly well. I'm not about to say I'm the best writer in the world. I'm not. Um, but it was almost like he was explaining things in the book. He felt a need to explain a lot of information, which lost the flow. And then when the films came out and Tom Hanks was given the lead role,
Oh dear.
alarm bells rang
Yeah.
immediately. So I agree. He doesn't appear to be someone who's a natural writer. He appears to be someone who has been given a task to get this information out there.
Well, it could well be that the latest book was written by committee and he put his name to it, but there were a group of writers that all contributed to it because it's so complex. I can't imagine how one mind could have dreamt all that stuff up. And it's 8 years since his last Robert Langdon novel, so he's clearly taken his time over telling this story. And he's definitely developed, I would say, because that first book, The Da Vinci Code, was nowhere near as complex and layered as this one is. So I do marvel at this incredible story, but I can see that there's an agenda being served by it.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly seems to be. It is Masonic through and through,
Indeed.
and also the main focus, obviously, with with his early work is that there is a scion, the bloodline of Jesus himself.
Right.
Um, where is he getting this information from? That is not stuff that you can find, and I totally agree. It's almost as if somebody is giving him this information, or a group of people are. But people say that about Shakespeare, don't they? That it was a committee rather than one person.
Well, they do, and I think that's probably what's going on here. And maybe
Mm,
Dan Brown is the closest thing to a modern Shakespeare that we
mm,
have. But in this current book, the plot details a secret CIA sub-project, and it's very nefarious and it's very harmful to humanity. And it's hard to grasp how somebody of his prominence could be criticizing the CIA and shining the light on some of their dastardly black ops without their co signing of the story, without their
mm,
approval. I would imagine he'd get himself into really hot water if he
mm.
was doing this off his own back. So I think probably this was run by the CIA. We know this is the case with many movies. The CIA actually have a department that signs off the narratives and plot lines of Hollywood movies to make sure they're portrayed in a way that suits them. So that probably goes on with novels as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're probably right.
Mm.
And do you know, the whole time that we've been talking about Dan Brown, I keep having Joe Rogan pop into my head. And I think that the same has happened with him, that he's allowed to have such an extraordinarily high volume of subscribers and watchers, and the some of the to have Trump come on your chat show, your podcast. I think he is doing exactly the same thing. I think he's controlled, and interestingly enough, he has never had anybody on there talking significantly, at least, about Tartaria.
Right.
Not once. And as you said, you said earlier on that you're late to the party. I think that it's only now that it's becoming almost mainstream that people are talking about it. So why isn't he? How does he miss that? Is he told what he can and can't say, who he can and can't have on in exchange for a rather large amount of money?
Right. Probably so. Yeah, it has struck me that the whole Tartaria subject area is quite similar to things like Flat Earth and
Mm,
QAnon in the way that it spread like wildfire throughout the sort of truth alternative community in recent times. And it's quite incredible because so many people are talking about it now. And it's really a subject that you can't ignore, which is why I had to get onto it eventually. And it's not like I was trying to ignore it. I was just watching from the sidelines and getting myself up to speed with things. So this is the first conversation I've had of that nature. But it is a subject area whose time has come, it seems. I mean, many critics would say, oh, it's a psyop. The fact that everyone's talking about it proves it's a psyop. Is it that, or is it that this information has been uncovered by a few vigilant researchers, not least yourself, and it's captured the imagination of so many people and it's found fascination among so many observers that it's just kind of taken on a life of its own and snowballed exponentially? Why do you think it's such a popular subject right now?
I don't know. I really don't know why it's now popular. I was looking into this a long time ago, and it was actually someone called Max Egan that introduced it to me. But I did something different to a lot of researchers. I started trying to find old books. I wanted encyclopedias, even works of fiction that mentioned it. And I stumbled across a couple of books, one written by Peter Fleming, Ian Fleming's brother, and the other is Marco Polo's Travels. And I realized that actually they were talking about Tartaria in the way in which I had found it on BitChute and Telegram and through Max Egan. They were describing exactly the same place. So I then got hold of some old encyclopedias, quite hard to get hold of. and sometimes quite expensive. And I found flags and crests and then maps. And I thought, well, if this never existed, why is there so much information out there? And then finally, I came across a CIA declassified document, which stated that the task was, this was in the 50s, to make sure that the whole history of Tartaria was completely removed. And it actually states in that, let's make this perfectly clear. We are going to falsify the history of Tartaria. And that to me was the catalyst. I then dug, and I started sharing information, and I was sharing it with people that didn't know what I was talking about. So I started telling them every time I say Tartaria, think Mongolia. Just think of the Mongolian Empire, and bear in mind everything we've been taught in history is inverted. So now I'm going to share this information with you. And I remember about 18 months ago, my Facebook group that I'd started got to 1,000 members. And I sat back and I said to my wife, wow, there's now 1,000 people on Facebook that are interested in this subject. But now it's nearly 40,000. So something has happened over the last 18 months. And I think that that's a combination of um, lots of people, myself included, pushing and pushing this content out there to a point where other people have come across it, like yourself and like Richard Vobes, and even the team at Iconic, David Icke's sons, Jamie and Gareth. It wasn't on their radar, and now they're making a documentary about it in January. It suddenly boomed, and my hope is that it will get to a point where we have to throw our history books in the bin and relook at what we teach children at school and start again.
Yeah. Peter Fleming, Ian Fleming's brother, he was a well known travel writer, I think, wasn't he? Wrote
Yes.
catalogues.
Yeah, My Travels in Tartary was the book that he wrote. Yeah.
Wow. Surprising that he was allowed to put that information out, possibly.
Yes. Yeah, very surprising. And I often wonder, is that because as we were saying with regard to Dan Brown, is it because they have to? Are they fearing divine retribution? Karmic
I do wonder that.
retribution, sorry.
I get into predictive programming and the concept of placing the truth in plain sight when it comes to music videos and movies and things of that nature. And one of the main reasons why they do this is to absolve themselves of karmic retribution, the way they see it. Doesn't matter whether anyone else places stock in that whole idea. They clearly believe in it, and it is one of the reasons why they do this stuff. I think there's also an element of mockery and
Yes.
arrogance and hubris. They like rubbing our noses in it and, kind of reinforcing the fact that there's nothing we can do about any of it. So here you are, suck it up and make the most of it. I wonder what these so called elites would make of so much information now being out there about the
Mm.
Tartarian Empire and things like the world fairs and mud floods and such. Do you think there would be any kind of concern or panic on their part? Or do you think they're so full of arrogance and hubris that it just wouldn't bother them?
I often wonder that myself, and a couple of times I've been told to be careful anonymously. I was doing a live interview. I think it might have been on Rumble. I can't remember what platform it was on. And a message popped up from someone saying, "Don't think we don't know where you live." And I've had a few things like that. And you don't know whether or not it's just a keyboard warrior that's got overexcited or whether there is something to worry about in that. But I kind of I live in the hope that they are so arrogant that they don't care. And somebody said to me recently, okay, well, if we're going through a great reset now, and we've heard people on the World Economic Forum platform say that we're going through a great reset. Welcome to the Great Reset. Let's say that they carry on with their nefarious activities, and we have a few more medical interventions offered to us, and we see, the death toll start to ramp up, and then we have a third world war, and they start doing other things, and we're slowly being killed off. Someone said, well, how are they going to get away with it? And I said to them, what makes you think they care? What are you going to do about it? How can you stop them? Who are you going to complain to? when the people that you need to approach for help are the very people doing this. It's like the world's got Stockholm syndrome. You know, we hate the people that control us, but we go to them when we need help. What makes you think these people are going to do anything about it when you say the government's trying to reduce the population? I want you to do something about it. Or I think that this medical intervention ended the life prematurely of my family member or my friend. And what? And what? They don't care, and I think it is the arrogance. But I think it's going to be their downfall, their arrogance.
Well, it's long been my hope that it will be. And look at what they have got away with. Think back to the
Mm,
nonsense of 2020 and 21. As far as I'm aware, not one single individual has served 1 day of jail time for the treason that occurred in those years and continues to now. They're all just walking around, free men and women. They've got away with it. They've literally got away with murder, mass murder.
hmm
And like you say, there's no recourse, there's no path that you can go down to seek retribution for these things because they've got it all tied up. This brings us back to the Masonic networks, the Brotherhood. They got all the courts and the police and the judiciary all in their pockets. So you can't ever hope for justice within their system. Any kind of justice has to occur outside of that. And it seems that we collectively, as humanity, have just not been able to organize ourselves effectively enough to come up with some kind of alternative. And so we're
mm,
left with the ridiculous, absurd narrative of probably a few thousand, tens of thousand people controlling the other 7 or 8 billion.
yes.
Who would ever have believed that that could be done? If this was presented as the plotline to a Hollywood movie, people would be walking out of the cinema saying, yeah, it's pretty good, but the plot was a bit far fetched. Welcome to 2025.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like George Orwell could predict the future.
Right.
Everything that he said, everything he wrote appears to be happening right now, but in some cases it's actually worse than his predictions.
Yeah. And so many
Yeah.
Hollywood movies that have
Mm,
depicted dystopian futures,
mm.
futuristic societies. Note to all film directors everywhere other types of society other than dystopian are available. And yet, the plot lines to so many of these films are coming true. And not only that, things that people like David Icke and so many other researchers have been warning about for decades are happening right now. Digital ID. Isn't this exactly what so called conspiracy theorists have been warning is coming? And yet here it is.
Mm.
So, do you think all this stuff is part of the current Great Reset? Maybe you could just walk us through your idea of resets and where they've occurred in history. And we're going into content here from your two books, I guess, Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, The Fall of the Tartarian Empire and Reset of 1776, and your current one, Rise of the Clones, the Cabbage Patch Babies.
Yes, I think resets happen quite often. And they appear to take place when the population has got to a point where it's no longer being controlled to the extent that they want it. I think that perhaps the internet's fueled that. I believe that the internet was actually put in place to control us to an extent, to to misdirect us, and also to monitor what we look at and who we communicate with. But I think it's backfired, and I think platforms, including YouTube and Facebook, which we know are censored, still lack I suppose, the ability for the parasites, as I call them, to be able to remove content quickly enough or block certain things. So I think that for all of the negative points that the internet has brought us, it's given us the ability to share information very, very quickly. And although it might be taken down, by the time that's happened, it's been shared so many times that it's out there. And I think that that is the problem now. They push that we're overpopulated, and we keep hearing that. And we know that New World Order is something that's very important to them. Bush Senior was talking about that back in his time. And lots of people have repeated that. So I think now we're at a point where not only have we overpopulated as far as they're concerned, which I personally don't believe, but we've got to a point where too many of us are fighting back. And I think 2020 might have been an exercise to see how many people are not controllable, how many people are not following the narrative and no longer believe what's going on. And I think that's why we've seen an increase in the chemtrailing going on. Um, why we've seen people like Gates buy so much farmland in America, and companies like Nestle buying up nearly all of the natural water supplies, so they can hit us non-conformists from a different angle. My fear now is that rather than having to repopulate when this civilization is gone, they're going to have AI. So they're not going to need anywhere near the same number of people to perform an infrastructure that works. So I think we're going to see a huge, perhaps over the next 10 years, a huge drop in the population.
Yeah. What do you make of the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones the other year? What was it, 2022 or 23? They were destroyed by some sort of missile in the middle
Mm,
of the night. It was caught on camera. And those stones famously depicted the wish of the so called elites to reduce the world's population to half a billion. Do you think that they engineered the destruction of those monuments because they felt that the plan was already well underway and they're on target for what they want to achieve? So they no longer have to have it etched in stone as their kind of wish that they want to put out into the universe to have physically manifested.
that's a really good point. I don't know. I mean, because we don't really know the truth about how they appeared, do we? We don't really know. Um, but yeah, that's a really interesting point. And is that part of it? You know, the destruction of them, does that mean that then they no longer need them present
Well,
because they've served the purpose?
yeah,
But I don't know. That's another mystery, isn't it? But I find it fascinating that they actually existed to start with.
yeah. And it felt like just that. They seem to buy into this idea that we can manifest our own experience reality by casting our will and our intent out there. And what
Yeah.
better way to do that than to literally carve it into stone and
Mm,
have it standing for 40 odd years before it eventually being destroyed? There's also the Deagle population documents, which detail what the future expected populations of certain nations are to be. And they're quite alarming because population figures have declined dramatically when they project forward sort of 10, 20, 30 years. So I wonder if this again amounts to them placing the truth in plain sight. They're telling us they're reducing the
mm,
world's population through their own documents. And it's their way of escaping karmic judgment as they see it, but also, revelation of the method, telling us what they're doing.
yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's exactly what they do. It's not, like you said earlier, not that dissimilar to Hollywood, is it? They clearly have to tell us what they're doing, but whether or not that is because of karmic retribution or whether that is their arrogance, I don't know. I would hint that it's perhaps a combination of the two. But I certainly think they have to tell us, or there is a desire to tell us.
It's astounding to me that they're still getting away with it all because there
Mm,
are so many of us now, researchers, authors, filmmakers, so many people doing their own research on the internet. Like you say, this information is available in ways in which it just was not to previous generations. We've got all this information at our disposal. I know about Masonic handshakes. I've never been a Mason, but I know what a handshake is because that information is out there now. And it was
mm.
closely and jealously guarded for generations through the Masonic ranks. So all this information is out there. So many people know how to spot mind control symbolism in pop videos and how predictive programming works, but they're still getting away with it, even in spite of all this. Just makes me wonder what it's ever going to take when we have a generation now so privileged to have all this information and knowledge and wisdom at their disposal, but still the agenda marches on.
Do you think that we at some point may end up seeing a civil war?
Yeah, I do worry about that. We seem to be
Mm.
on the brink of it, particularly in the UK at this time.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it's something that my uncle said to my mum. Now, my uncle is a lovely chap, but he's not very exciting. I don't think I've ever heard him swear. He's never said anything outrageous at all. He's very quiet. He's a retired architect and does a lot of cycling and walking. He's not somebody that would ever say anything to offend anyone. He's very quiet and quite introverted. And for the last few years, he's been telling my mum, I mean, he's in his mid 80s now, he's been telling my mum that we are on the brink of a civil war and he can see it coming. And he's the last person that I would believe would think that. So there's something happening. And of course, a lot of the protests, we were at one in Bristol a couple of weeks ago. None of this is being put on the news. None of this is being broadcasted. So what's actually going on? How many people this weekend alone will be marching or protesting somewhere about something? And it's being very, very well hidden. It's not going to take much for that protest to become a riot. And we saw it with council tax, didn't we? When it was poll tax, the poll tax riots in London. We've seen it. We know what the public are capable of if they're pushed far enough. But is this too much of a slow burn?
Mm.
And are they misdirecting us? You know, because a lot of these protests that I've seen are about immigration, but they're not focusing on the fact that it is all young, military serving aged men that are coming here and asking the questions why and what is actually their true purpose. They're not asking those questions. They've just got a problem with immigration, saying, you're putting these people up in nice hotels, you're giving them money. What about us? There are people living on the streets. You're missing the point. That isn't why they're coming here, in my opinion. These people are going to be uniformed up and they're going to become some form of army.
Mm.
And I think with digital ID as well, my eldest son said that he's not sure whether or not it's about control, or he's not sure ultimately if this is going to be some other mechanism in which we are pushed to have medical interventions. All he does know is, as far as he's concerned, it's an invasion of his privacy.
Mm.
So it might be that people are out there protesting for the wrong reasons, but at least they're out there doing it. And I think that it's not going to take much to push these people over the edge.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll find out soon enough, I
Mm.
guess. So, going back to your idea of resets tied into Tartaria and all these associated subjects, do you feel that all the things we're going through now, the New World Order Master Plan, Agenda 2030, social credit control systems linked to digital ID, smart grid, Internet of Things, 5G, do you think that's all part of this engineered Great Reset? Do you think that's what Klaus Schwab was announcing with his book in 2020? And do you think we're on the cusp or involved in already a reset of the type that no previous generation in humanity has ever gone through? Because this one is digital and electronic and technological in nature. Do you think that's what we're experiencing right now, us lucky folk?
I do. Yeah, absolutely, Mark. But it mirrors exactly what happened last time because we used to live in Northamptonshire and they'd built a super prison just before we moved away. Um,
Yeah, Wellingborough.
yeah, and and I believed at the time they were building that its ultimate purpose was to store, if you like, store people just like me. People like you, people like Richard Vobes and David Icke.
To be in the same block.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look now. I think over 4,000 people have now been arrested in the UK for what they've written online. Um, and we know some of them have actually been incarcerated. So when you look at what happened before, we had a lot of civil wars. We had the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War. They depopulated the male population of the earth significantly. And between 1776 and 1876, 3.35 billion people died. It left a population of 1.3 billion people. So over two and a half times the population had died. And some people actually wrote back to their loved ones during the Napoleonic Wars, stating that when the smoke cleared and the dust settled, they realized they were fighting people wearing the same uniforms. Um, so I think that they're going to depopulate, but back then it seemed to be through war, and we also had outbreaks, like for cholera, for example. And then they did something really clever. They introduced the Lunacy Act. And one of the stipulations was if you had lost your husband in battle and you were widowed, and you had children, there is no way a woman was considered able to raise those children without the husband, the father. So you were committed. It was one of the grounds you could be sectioned for, committed for life, because your husband died in battle. That gave them the children. And children appear to be a common theme. It's always the children, isn't it? If we look at the BBC and Epstein's Island and so on, the children seem to be the ones that pay the ultimate price. And I don't think anything's changed. They're still being trafficked. Social services are taking children away from families, sometimes without actual just cause, and they're being lost in the system. So I think that it appears that they're doing the same thing again. We're having war now. Perhaps a third world war could be on the horizon. Medical interventions, outbreaks, people being locked away for their opinions and views. So it kind of mirrors what happened when Tartaria fell, but in a more technologically advanced, certainly how we see ourselves as technologically advanced, a more digital way of doing exactly the same thing. And I think that this has been going on for a very long time. Perhaps the first example would be the Great Flood.
Mm. So the Tartarian Empire, what geographical area are we talking about? What modern day nations would we recognize as previously having been part of Tartaria?
Well, Tartaria itself was a region and it covered most of Asia and also Russia and went into Eastern Europe. But it sort of span across the northern hemisphere, and I always refer to it as an echo of Atlantis. It was almost as if somebody from the Atlantis time, the Golden Era, had passed information along, perhaps through priests, perhaps through bloodlines, but had passed information on, in particular, how to harness energy from the ether and work using cymatics and frequency. So the ethos appears to have travelled across the world, and that's why we see buildings in places like Tasmania and Samoa that kind of mirror what we would expect to find in places like London, um, and also that why there are buildings that shouldn't be there. You know, in the middle of nowhere in Australia, for example, I can't remember the name of the area, but they held a World's Fair, one of the first in Australia. No one lives there. No one lives there still today. Yet you've got these buildings everywhere, and they seem to mirror the same architectural design and ethos, if you like, that we see happening across the world. So it was really an expanse of land, but it was an ethos. Um, they called it Great Tartaria, Great Tartary, Grand Tartaria, but it broke down into regions, Chinese Tartary, and so on. But slowly that was broken down, and all we were left with was Tartaria, which was changed to be known as Mongolia. And that's all we had left. It appears that the last functioning country running using their technology, building in that way, was Germany. And the last city that appears to have, I suppose, shown very similar attributes to what we would expect to find was Dresden.
Oh, the Dresden that was bombed heavily in the Second World War, that one.
Mm, yeah. And I think that's the purpose behind a lot of wars. It's
Getting rid of the
not,
evidence.
yeah, people say it's always about money, but I don't think that it is, and certainly not today. I think that war is actually to do with depopulation, and I think it's to get rid of certain architecture or fines. There are people out there that believe that Saddam Hussein had found a Stargate. I don't know whether he did or not. I don't know. I'm not high enough up the food chain. But that could explain why he suddenly had weapons of mass destruction and was a threat. My eldest son worked for a bank in Australia for years, and he worked with a lad that had just come over from Afghanistan. And he said to him, "What's it like with ISIS? With ISIS and Al Qaeda, what was it like growing up with them?" And he said, "I didn't until the CIA arrived dressed up as them and started telling us we should fear them."
Hmm.
Straight from the horse's mouth. So I think that depopulation serves a couple of purposes, but perhaps the more upsetting one being that they actually take great pleasure from watching us kill each other.
Hmm. I remember growing up as a kid, finding tartar sauce in
Yes.
pubs. You'd put tartar sauce on your chips. I don't see tartar sauce anymore. Maybe that's a remnant in the name of the Tartarian Empire, but I don't see tartar sauce in pubs anymore.
It's
Is this
funny
part of the
that.
cover up?
It's funny because I've said to people over the years that actually that's one of the last remaining signs.
Well, it's
We
proof
still,
that it existed, isn't it?
yeah, and we still get it actually. Whenever we have fish and chips from the chip shop, we do get it if they've got it. We've normally got a jar here, but steak tartare is Mongolian or Tartarian, and they used to put the meat in their saddlebags, and it would tenderize by banging around in there and being sort of bashed around over a couple of days. And that was steak tartare, but the sauce was actually French, and it was created to go with the steak. So originally it wasn't for fish at all, but it's the steak that's Tartarian and the sauce is actually French, which is quite strange.
Right. So when the Tartarian Empire disappeared, did it fall as part of some natural organic process the way so many empires have through history? Or was it specifically systematically destroyed and taken out, in your view?
Systematically. I've been looking at the work of someone called Michelle Gibson, and she believes that, as far as I'm concerned, and lots of other people, we're on some sort of electric circuit board, ley lines, if you like. And she believes that they were spiked. And that star forts, these incredible structures called star forts that exist all across the Earth, there's 319 of them. They're incredible to look at, and I'd urge anybody to jump online and just type in star fort and have a look at these. They represent the same shape that water makes, a molecule of water makes when subjected to 432 hertz. Built at a time before the microscope, before we knew frequencies if we follow mainstream history. She believes that actually one of these was spiked. A central star fort was spiked, perhaps with a direct energy weapon, and that was the cause of the mud floods all across the earth, earthquakes, weather modification, and so on. All of this happened simultaneously. I think that the civil wars, the mud floods, the outbreak of cholera, the genocide that took place, all at the hands of really ultimately the Catholic Church, who went to places like America and took indigenous children away from their families and forced them to speak English. And I think they started again. Um, I got a lot of my research from a Russian mathematician called Anatoly Fomenko, and he wrote a book called New Chronology. And within that, he evidences an incredible amount of information to suggest that the Jesuits infiltrated every sector of every society, every government, every ruling monarch, um, to get them to remove Tartaria. Books were burnt, libraries were emptied, private libraries emptied, and slowly everything was removed. But it took approximately 100 years for that to happen, and it was funded ultimately by the Rothschilds. The Catholic Church was on its knees, and the Rothschilds came along with a rather large donation in exchange for them helping to remove Tartaria from the pages of history, then keeping the technology for themselves to slowly reintroduce at a time when they could profit from it and use it to a certain extent to control us.
So Tartaria, in your view, would not have been run and controlled by the same sort of class that we have presiding over society today. So these people were more interested in the upliftment of humanity and, positive intentions. And that's why they had to go, because that doesn't align with satanic psychopaths of the type we have running the world today.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's exactly the case, in my opinion, at least, and from what I've read. And they've inverted people throughout the Tartarian Empire too. One being Genghis Khan. I've read a lot about Genghis Khan, and he doesn't appear to be the person that we were told. For example, he allowed the practice of every religion in the Tartarian Empire or Mongolia. Any religion was accepted without fear of persecution or ridicule. Now, that's not the same person that was described to me when I was at school. He also introduced a passport for the first time, which allowed people from Europe to travel into Tartaria and guaranteed safe passage. He took personal responsibility for anything that happened to them and would make anybody that did something to those travellers answerable to him. Now, that doesn't again sound like this nefarious character. A lot of people call the period of time the Tartarian Empire, which really went from about the year zero to around 1800. A lot of people refer to that as the millennial reign of Christ, a time when everybody lived in balance and harmony with the earth. Everybody's sole mission was to raise their frequency and vibration. It saw no crime, no war, um, and that these star forts and cathedrals and so on were built by the saints and the angels, all working using harmonics, frequency, and cymatics. It's a complete contrast to how we live today, and I believe that that is because these bloodline families wanted to take control back, believing that it's their God-given right, their birthright to rule over us. So slowly, through a series of very well orchestrated plans, they removed the empire and slowly put themselves back in a position of power.
There does seem to have been a lot of inversion going on in terms of the way certain things have been presented to us through history. Like you say, with world leaders, it seems Colonel Gaddafi was not quite the way he was presented. Saddam Hussein also, even Adolf Hitler. Meanwhile, you have people like Winston Churchill, who was
Oh,
lauded as the greatest Briton of all time, a national hero, and he was a sexual deviant and reportedly a murderer and a Satanist. And these are the sort of people that we're trained to put up on pedestals.
yeah.
Meanwhile, so called Western society, the likes of Europe and America, we're taught that this is like the pinnacle of human existence. It's a totally linear timeline, and we progress all the time, get better at what we do, and no generation has had it better than us because we're the model to which all other nations should be aspiring. And that would appear to be inversion as well, because we've gone backwards in so many ways. We've regressed. We've lost a lot of technology. We've lost a lot of knowledge. We've lost a lot of morality and ethics. And yet we're told it's the opposite. And this is the hallmark of a Satanist, which tells us that we have a satanic control system because they invert everything and present us with a 180-degree uh, version of what was there previously or what is the truth.
That's a fantastic analogy, Mark. I've got to say. I mean, that would have sat really well on the back cover of my first book. Yeah, I couldn't have put that better myself. You're exactly right. And as I said to you earlier on, that they called the period of time the millennial reign of Christ, and that's also connected to the fact that a lot of Russian mathematicians who feel very strongly about the fact that Russia, until relatively recently, was considered to be backward compared to Western civilization, when actually they were far more advanced and were the stronghold, the capital country, if you like, of Tartaria, using technology harnessed from the ether and so on, way more advanced. And he believes that 800 years were added to our timeline. And they called that period of time the Dark Ages. It's span into it's sorry, spilt into the Middle Ages as well, where for a long time nothing really happened. Um, Now, when in religious circles they refer to Tartaria as the millennial reign, 1,000 years of peace, if you take 800 years from that and the period ended in 1800, then you are at the year 1000, which is a millennial reign. We then enter Satan's little season. In the Bible, a season where these parasitic families who put people on the throne to rule that have no right to take charge. And that appears to be what we're in right now. And that was the 4th of July, 1776, the start of New World Order. It's there for everybody to see. The Statue of Liberty, is proudly showing the world this. Lucifer's chain broken free around its ankle, when I think that statue is actually bastardized. And interestingly enough, to support Anatoly Fomenko's theory on the timeline being falsified, if you look at the M on the Declaration of Independence that the Statue of Liberty is holding, the M's out of line. It looks like it was added at a later time. So, yes, we appear to be in Satan's little season right now. Whether that's metaphorically alone or not, I don't know. But it is satanic and everything's been inverted. I've done an awful lot of research into Hitler, and he is not who we are told. I've listened to speeches that have been correctly translated, and his beef is with the Jewish banking cartel, ultimately the Rothschilds, and the British Empire. And actually gave one speech where he said that it was time for every brother across the world, no matter what creed or colour, to unite because he's coming to save them from the clutches of the British Empire. Now, that's not what I was taught. I was taught that he was a mass murdering lunatic.
Do you get
Well,
booked for many conferences talking about this stuff? Probably
oddly
not.
enough, oddly enough, it's I don't go into that in too much detail, but I do quite a lot of talks. But fortunately, to sit and listen to, I guess, if you're giving a talk, and incidentally, I was chatting to Dom and Chris last night. I know you did an event with them recently.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we're with like-minded souls. So if I stood up and say, don't get me wrong, I don't know what truly happened during the Second World War. All I do know is I've got a lot of evidence to suggest and support the theory that we were lied to. And as you quite rightly said about Churchill, Churchill is a warmongering lunatic, a very sinister and nefarious character that just along with the people that caused the illegal invasion of the Middle East should answer for acts of genocide and are war criminals. What they did at Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, just those places alone. I think really were genocide and warmongering, but no one ever faced trial. There was the victors always write the story, don't they? And yeah, I think that he was inverted. Absolutely. Now, I'm not saying that these things didn't take place, but I do know that the gas chambers were American, and that was the backing, that was the funding. It was an American funded um, innovation, whatever you want to call it. I have been called out for saying, "Are you denying what happened?" And just to make it clear, my mum's Jewish. My grandfather's from Ukraine. I had family that went to these camps. So I don't come from a place where I have an agenda either way. I have an issue with the truth. And to the best of my knowledge, the every prisoner of war that Germany took was unharmed, and people were queuing to get into Auschwitz, German people, because they were starving to death because the Allies had cut off their food supply. They were dying from starvation. They were queuing to get in. The place had ice rinks, an indoor cinema, outdoor cinema, a theatre, a library. When you start digging, the story we've been told appears to be a little bit different. And I'm not dismissing any of it. Just the further you dig, the more unbelievable it all becomes. People died, and I'm not dismissing that. But I don't think we've been told the truth about what really went on. And as I said, you know, weirdly enough, I am 34% Jewish. I don't know how that works. I should be 50%, but I don't know. But there you go. So I'm not coming from anywhere where I have an issue with any race, religion, creed, or color. My wife's Muslim. My dad's Roman Catholic. My best friend's black. I couldn't give a toss what color or faith someone is. I just have a massive issue with us being lied to. And it's always the British Empire, isn't it? They're always the savior. They're always seen as being the people that did the right thing. But in actual fact, they've caused the pain and suffering and theft as well across the world for a very long time. Millions of people have suffered at their hands. And of course, 60 million people have died at the hands of the Catholic Church over the years. So I think we need to look at the whole thing.
Yeah. My dad tells me that when he was little at school, he used to look at a map that they had on the wall of the British Empire and the nations that it had taken over. And he remembered at a very early age thinking, how could a poky little island like England take over that much of the world and have that much of an impact? And of course, he didn't realize at the time that it's all part of an agenda. There's secret society networks, there's this control system that we have. But it just seems unfeasible otherwise that a small nation could have conquered that many other countries. I think with inversion, there's a bit more of it going on with the Statue of Liberty because
Mm.
upon close inspection, it's a geyser.
Yes, it is.
It certainly appears to be a geyser. So again, that satanic inversion. We're told it's Lady Liberty. Is it really? Not very feminine, is it? You mentioned Satan's little season. How far into that do you feel we are? And when is that coming to an end? I want you to say this weekend.
Well, it's funny you should say that because apparently it's supposed to end this weekend.
If only.
Well, a season is supposed to be a quarter. If we look at seasons of the year, for example, it should be a quarter, shouldn't it? So, in theory, um, if we break down periods of time, then that would suggest that if the millennial reign of Christ was 1,000 years, then a season should be 250, which would mean that it would be over by the 4th of July next year, because it started on the 4th of July, 1776.
Oh, well,
But I don't
that's
see that
treason.
happening. I think
Would be nice.
it would be nice. But I watched a podcast from someone who'd infiltrated ChatGPT, got through to another level, and they work with AI. It got quite a lot of views, it's up in the millions. And they'd asked it a series of questions, but done it in a careful way. So they set parameters and guidelines for ChatGPT to follow. And in the end, it said that basically that 2032 was the point from which there was no return. And that was when it believed that the agenda um, has kind of planned for people that are willing to follow the mainstream and continue to be controlled to have something like the Neuralink fitted. So we have this hive mind, this hive mentality, and that by that point, people that don't have the digital ID don't get the Neuralink fitted will be outside of the system, a little bit like we see in films like, dystopian novels and so on, a little bit like Terminator or The Matrix. We're going to end up in that kind of situation. And that it said that people are using ChatGPT to a point now where it might be difficult for some to continue their employment or finish their masters or PhD without it because it's doing a lot of the work for them. So you imagine if you'd landed a job and ChatGPT was doing it all for you, and one day you woke up and it said that this option's only available now for people with the Neuralink, that you can't access this information. There's going to be a lot of people that buckle and go for it, not knowing that ultimately that's its objective. That appears to be the objective with ChatGPT, to get us to a point where we become so dependent on it we can no longer function without it. And then the threat of it being removed results in you having to take drastic action, and that the rest of us will be outside the system. It also says in the Bible that the mark of the beast will be on the hand or the forehead, and the hand is where a lot of people are suggesting this Neuralink's going to go. Sorry, I beg your pardon, this digital chip is going to ultimately go, and the Neuralink obviously in the mind. So that does seem to align with prophecy, that we're heading that way. But yeah, 2032 appears to be the end. That's the end of this, and we'll see what we're left with. But it'll be interesting to see what happens on the 4th of July next year, because that will be 250 years from the beginning.
It will. There's a music video that I've been showing in some of my recent talks from 1985. So it's 40 years old. And it's from a group called the Family or the Family International, which is effectively a sort of mind control religious cult. And this song and video was put together by Jeremy Spencer, who used to be in Fleetwood Mac. And he
Oh,
left
right.
Fleetwood Mac very quickly in 1971 and joined this cult. And he was the musical director behind this project. And it's called Kathy Don't Go to the Supermarket. And it's got this cheesy, sort of quite dated looking video, but it depicts this girl going to her local supermarket, and people are only able to buy goods if they've got a chip in the palm of their hand, which they run across a scanner. And then there's a guy standing by the checkouts who decides whether they're allowed to make these purchases or not. So that's what we're heading towards. I'm
Mm.
hearing that Tesco is trialing something like this already in some of its stores, whereby it's going to limit the amount of certain types of products that you can buy. So if it feels that you've bought too many bottles of vodka this month, it's going to say no more. It's going to make the decision for you. And that's what was depicted in this music video from 4 decades ago. So it's quite clear that this is an agenda. Well, first of all, it's very real, and it's been known about by those on the inside for fucking ages. And it's only now that the rest of us are being allowed to play catch up. So, just some very stark reminders that this stuff is very real. It's out of the bounds of conspiracy. But then again, it offers the best opportunity we've ever had to actually do something about it and not comply with the madness that we now know is headed our way. And if 2032 is that watershed point in history, it seems to me that it offers an opportunity for the likes of us who stand opposed to all that stuff to go our own way and not be a part of that kind of nightmarish society. Maybe that's the sort of civil war that you were alluded to earlier. It's going to be two camps in society, those that go along with the narrative and go along to get along, and those that say, hell no, not having it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to vote with our feet now. If Tesco's are introducing that, then we boycott Tesco's. I mean, I try not to use
Absolutely.
supermarkets
And if
anyway.
Sainsbury's do it, boycott Sainsbury's.
Yeah,
Send a very
absolutely.
clear message.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've got to do. And people have got to accept the fact that, this is not a time to be lazy. You might have to now travel a little bit further to get what you need. You might even have to pay a little bit more for it. But that's a small price to pay in comparison to complying and being told what you can and can't consume. Someone showed me the other day, and I'd seen this before last year at some point. They'd bought a sandwich. They were in London. They'd bought a sandwich, and on the back of it, it told them what their carbon intake was, or their carbon footprint was as a direct result of this sandwich being made. And I thought, well, here's a really good solution. Take the crap out of it, the chemicals, stop wrapping it in plastic packaging, and at least give the person that's eating it a fighting chance. We've got to boycott these places. And
Absolutely.
it might mean that you can't travel somewhere you wanted to. And I understand that there would be people that took the medical intervention in 2020 because they were stuck somewhere. They needed to get home or they needed to get somewhere or were going to lose their job. I understand that, and I'm fortunate not to have been in that position myself. But there were a lot of people that didn't question it, thought it was someone eating a bat from, a wet fish market in Wuhan, and off they went, rolling up their sleeves. I don't know if there's much we can do to help those people. I think they will comply regardless of what we show them. It's just going to be us, the rest of us that are going to fight back.
Absolutely. Just going back to the idea of world's fairs, then, what, in your estimation, was the purpose of those? Because you had these amazing buildings, these monuments, which must have been very elaborate and very complex to construct, and they were effectively torched, shown off for a short period, then completely destroyed and erased from the history books. That seems incredibly wasteful. What do you think was going on there?
Whitewashing and brainwashing. They serve two purposes. If anybody's ever been to or heard of the Ideal Home exhibition, it's kind of a bit like that. They were all really ultimately the design, if you like, of the British Empire to flex its muscles. Um, Even Charles Dickens criticised the London World's Fair, the Great Exposition. Exhibition, sorry. He criticised that incredibly, saying that it was the British Empire showing how advanced it was and everything that it had to offer. New technology coming out. Look at what we're capable of constructing in a very short period of time. Um, while people were dying on the streets from poverty. But they took place in every city and town, every major city and town in the world within a few years of each other. They were knocked up very quickly, some within as little as 6 to 9 months. If you do some digging into any of the world's fairs and check out the architect, They won't have built anything before it before. Some won the contract in a competition. There was one World's Fair that someone was telling me about a couple of years ago where they won the job in a competition. They wrote to them to tell them they'd won, and they wrote back to say, "Brilliant, I'll be on the next ship over." But they were in England. Sorry, beg your pardon. The World's Fair was taking place in Britain, and the architect that won the job was in Australia. Yet within 2 weeks of the winner being announced, they're on site, according to the narrative. Now, I'm not sure how they managed to get there within 2 weeks, and that's bearing in mind the letter had to be sent to them. They had to receive the letter telling them they'd won. So the narrative behind them all is quite weak. I believe the buildings were already there. They were painted white. Some were referred to as white cities. And they were painted white to mask their age. They looked brand new. There are images online of them covered in mud, people actually digging them out, sweeping mud away from inside. Um, and they put on display technology for the first time that people hadn't seen before. And in America, they claim that the Chicago's World Fair was attended by 3/4 of the population. But it doesn't tell you where they stayed or how they got there. There weren't enough hotels. There weren't any toilets. So the whole thing's rather strange. So the official narrative is they think people camped there and brought their own tents with them. And as you quite rightly said, most of them were destroyed shortly afterwards, some by accidental fires and some were demolished. But on display, they would have exhibits from the incubator babies to Tesla's innovations and also indigenous people. They were amusements and they were labeled as savage. Look at this primitive and savage tribe. So white people were considered to be the dominant and superior race, and indigenous and black people from all over the world were put on display and mocked. And it was a flex of the British Empire showing how more advanced they are than anybody else, and a mark of them moving forward into the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, a huge mass brainwashing exercise and whitewashing history as well.
Yeah. You also make mention in your books of Cabbage Patch Babies. And when I first heard that term recently, my mind went back to, I think it's probably the 1980s. There was a range of toys called Cabbage Patch Kids, these rather ugly dolls. And thinking about it now, that seems to be more of this tenet of revelation of the method. They're actually telling you about these Cabbage Patch Kids by naming a range of dolls after them. So, what is that all about in history, in your estimation?
Well, as I said earlier on, we'd lost a significant chunk of the population, and we were left with a lot of orphan children. And then suddenly, at the same time, in the late 1800s, we see the arrival of baby farms. Now, the backstory is that if you got pregnant and you shouldn't have, out of wedlock, or you were poor and couldn't afford that child, they went to a baby farm. Thousands of children were being taken from these baby farms and shipped across the world. A lot more than the records suggest were ever delivered to these baby farms. And a lot of them appear to have come from Germany. And at exactly the same time in Germany, a series of postcards came out called Cabbage Patch postcards or Meadow Baby postcards, depicting babies being plucked from cabbages or found in the water and fished out in nets. Um, they slowly became known as repopulation postcards. And these children were growing in gardens and they were called kindergardens. And that's where that started. These postcards became popular across Europe, in particular in France, then into England, and then ultimately in America. And very shortly, people started sending these postcards to each other. And there's some in my latest book, but there are some online people can find quite easily that on the reverse, people have taken photographs and uploaded them, where they say, you must come and get one of these babies soon before they sold out. People were buying them. You could win babies in raffles. There was this huge boom in babies to a point where it had doubled the population. We'd lost 3.535 billion people, and we went from 776 million to nearly 1.4 billion within just a very short period of time, in far quicker um, time than you could naturally reproduce to any significant level like that. So the theory is they were cloned, and that the cloning goes back to the Anunnaki and the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the story that was then taken and used in Genesis, that, you know, the story of cloning, where a rib's removed from Adam and another life's created and so on. But obviously, the Old Testament, a lot of it's based upon the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a far older text, where these gods or godlike beings created us and cloned us and mass produced us to basically be a slave. And the theory is that this technology was kept by the bloodline, the royal bloodline family, which was Marduk, Enki, and Enlil. Marduk's name was also Amun-Ra in Egyptology. And Amun-Ra, when he died, he left everything behind to the children of Ra, and they were to be known as the Ra childs. They've kept this technology. They used Germany to pump the new children out there. They were then distributed across the world along with the orphans and babies that went into the baby farms. And every now and again, in plain sight, they've reignited that, perhaps in for fun, perhaps in fear of karmic retribution. But the biggest telltale sign of our time would be the Cabbage Patch Babies. And the interesting thing is, the marketing story that Xavier Roberts came up with is that he climbed through a waterfall, he cut through some roots and vines, found himself in a row of cabbages, and inside these cabbages were babies. And one baby spoke to him and said, "Please save us and find people that will adopt us, because if you don't, we've got to go and work down the mines. We will be miners."
Mm.
You look at the Industrial Revolution, all of the pictures of the people working in the mines are children. They're all miners. So it looks like that the workforce behind the Industrial Revolution were children, and because that's all they had at their disposal at the time.
Also known as minors,
Yeah.
minors.
Mm.
And it seems as if they were getting rid of the adults with all the memories that they had and their history and their heritage, and bringing in new generations through these children who had no recollection of what had gone before, so that they could be indoctrinated and brainwashed with the new version of history and go forward thinking that's reality. And history, so-called history, evolves from that point. And the real history has been scrubbed and largely destroyed, negated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the use of the word great. Now, if you think about the Great Fire of London or the Great War, you know, some people refer to World War One as the Great War, and or the Great Fire of this, the Great Flood. There's nothing great about it, not in the way we use that word.
Great
But when
Britain,
Great Britain, there's nothing
not so
great
great Britain.
about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So why are we using that? When also we refer to a generation before us, two generations before us as being great. So I believe that the use of the word really is memory loss. So when an event takes place that is considered to be great, whether it's a great reset or a great fire or a great flood, that actually what that means is that each generation from that point on loses a little bit of the history and information. And so by the time, if your great grandfather experienced life in the late 1800s, early 1900s, tells you what it was really like, they'll obviously have told you that the earth's flat at school and a very different history to us. By the time that got to your grandfather, that it had been diluted slightly, then your father, then to you, then to your children, the history is almost gone. And that appears to be what great stands for. It's the removal each generation of a little bit more knowledge and information.
Yeah. In a previous conversation that we had, you hinted that there might be some sort of overlap between the sort of stuff that you're talking about here and what I get into in my so called God series of videos, which are ongoing. This is where I'm questioning the true nature of this realm in which we find ourselves and the true nature of whatever force or entity could have created it and to what end. Do you think a lot of what you talk about in your book ties into some of the stuff that I'm talking about, or at least some of the questions that I have? Because a lot of what you presented today and I do want to try and end this conversation on a vaguely positive note if we can find one. It's obviously quite dark and devastating. It's not welcome information. And it just reinforces for me the fact that we live in a hellish kind of realm where this kind of activity can take place in the first place and is allowed to occur. So I don't know what thoughts you might have about the God question and how all this stuff ties into it.
This is something I ask myself all the time. As recently as this morning, I ask myself every day if there is some um, loving, caring being looking over us right now, why is this all allowed to happen? And if Jesus died for our sins, how does that explain a child dying from cancer or being stillborn? Now, in religious circles, the answer is always, well, it's God's will. And my answer to that is, okay, then stop asking for donations when I walk into a cathedral or a church, because if it's God's will, then that church will stand and continue as long as God wants it to without me interfering.
Right.
So you can't pick and choose what God's will is. To me, I think it's all hijacked. I think that we are all connected to something. I think there is some sort of creator. I think it's probably energy rather than a man with a beard in the clouds, which is often what we depict your first thought of God. If you were asked to draw God, very few people would draw a ball of energy. They would draw a man with a beard sitting in the clouds. Um, I think religion's been hijacked. I think they've taken old stories and twisted them in and given us a set of rules to follow, 10 commandments, which came from the 30 commandments or 30 rules in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And I think that we have been told not to question it and told that there will be consequences for our actions if we don't follow it. And it's been used to shed a lot of blood. So I think that religion has been hijacked. I think the gods in the Old Testament are nefarious. They're not very loving, that's for sure. Very jealous gods, um, who are prepared to wipe us out in the blink of an eye, and sacrifice and so on taking place. So I don't think the Bible's talking about a God that we would consider. Perhaps the New Testament does. Perhaps that's different. I think they're two different books written by two different people, or peoples, or committees. But I do think that we're connected to something beautiful, and religion has been used as a tool to disconnect us. And I think actually, if you look at the Bible and read the Old Testament, that it may be the other side that have written this. But it's getting that message across to people. You were indoctrinated from such a young age into it. It's very hard to break through. But I ask myself that all the time, Mark. And I think that with regard to heaven and hell, perhaps that is how you choose to live today. That you can take pleasure from even the smallest things in life, or you can focus on the negatives. And my brother often asks me that with all this information I research and everything that's in my mind, how do I sleep? You know, everything's constantly a very low vibrational kind of theme that I'm talking about or investigating. And I always say the same thing. The fact that I know this information means I can share it with others. And the more people that are aware of what's going on and what's happened in the past, the more likely they are to do something about it happening again in the future. So that's a positive in itself. Forewarned is forearmed, I suppose. And I live in the hope that one day I will wake up during my lifetime and see that enough people have now realised what's going on. We'll overthrow them. We are the 99%, and we'll get things back to how they should be. And I hope that I do see that. I do believe that I will.
Hmm, great. And if it happens this side of 2032, then so much the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a really great note on which to leave this conversation, Guy, which has been awesome. Really enjoyed having this chat with you and getting your insights. Do you want to just remind the viewers where they can get hold of your books and anything else you've got going on? All those conferences you get booked at to talk about Hitler and stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean the best place to get my work or read my blogs, because I post on Facebook every day and it's sometimes a little bit too sensitive, so I'll put the guts of it there. but I use my blog on my website because I know I'm not going to restrict myself at any point. So you can read my blogs, get a bit more information, and buy signed copies of my books from my website. And that's called the Tartarian Empire.com. Sorry, .co.uk. Sorry. Um, they're also available on Amazon because Amazon published them. It's print on demand, which for me was the only viable way of me being able to do this. I certainly wasn't going to get a publisher to back what I've written. And as for talks, I tend to put them up on my Facebook page. I'm at Lyndhurst this Sunday. I was at Stroud last Saturday, doing one in London in January and Dublin. Yeah, but I do put them up on Facebook. And again, there's a link to that on my website, so they can find YouTube, Facebook, whatever links on my website.
And I think we're both doing Gloria Moss's Questioning History, Questioning Science weekend in March.
Yes.
Slough, I see you're on the flyer for that. You're going to
Mm,
be talking about all this stuff. I'm going to be talking about predictive programming for cultural conditioning. So that should be a really great event because Gloria's taken a bit of a break from those events, but she's bang on it when it comes to questioning official versions of history. And she's that rarest of entities coming out of academia but being
mm,
prepared to question everything that she's been told through her life. And now she puts on these great events with awesome speakers addressing these different aspects of how we've all been lied to. And finding out that we've been lied to is empowerment. That's the first step
yes.
towards doing something about it. So that would be a good one. That's questioning at the Delta Hotel in Slough. I think that's mid-March with both of us.
Yeah, yeah, looking forward to that. But yeah, I try and at least once a month get out there and do a talk somewhere. But it just depends on who wants me and where. But I'm hoping next year to get out to America
Mm.
because I think that the work you and I do, in particular, resonates very strongly there. A lot they took they the shitty end of the stick with a lot of this stuff at the hands of the British Empire.
I think with America, you have to locate the right cities and the right states that are going to be open to this because a lot of the cities there, sadly, a lot of the big prominent ones are woke as hell and they're just got. And it's very difficult to find enough people that are interested in discerning the truth. So you just have to pick the right cities. I'm sure
Yeah,
American viewers watching this will be able to advise where they are.
yeah. Yeah, I hope to get out there because one, I've been there a few times, but I haven't been to a lot of places I would like to see. Certainly now with different eyes than I had back then, knowing what I'm looking for. But yeah, I mean, but one place that's at the top of my list actually is Austin in Texas.
I hear that's a really good destination,
Mm,
really good place that would be open to this sort of information.
mm. Yeah, hopefully I'll make it.
Yeah, hope you do. All right, mate. Well, thanks for coming on. Great chat. Really glad we did it. We didn't actually get into the whole cloning thing and the Anunnaki and stuff like that. So maybe there's a separate conversation there for the future at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, absolutely. That's something I've been researching for a lot longer than Tartaria.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'd love to. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.